My name is Janakar Vanpura. I'm Vice Provost and Associate Vice President of Research International for the University of Calgary. I'm very proud to say that I belong to South Asian heritage, born and raised in Sri Lanka. So I'm going to bring some cultural greeting into this today's panel discussion, which actually is ideal during even the current time because of the pandemic, and have seen that people have avoided handshaking and they must be avoiding handshaking. Instead of that, I'm using a traditional greeting method that I have learned when I was a child, when I was in Sri Lanka. We put the palms together and we greet them, of course, with a wording that we provide in Sri Lanka called Ayubowan, which means, may you have a long life. In Sinhalese, a cultural greeting that can be said anytime in Sri Lanka. So with that cultural greeting, I want to get things started. I would like to remind you of few housekeeping items. Please note that this webinar will be recorded and published online to be viewed after by all registered participants. For the Q&A section of the event, please use the box on the bottom of the screen to ask our panelists a question. I would like to acknowledge our Government of Canada representatives, the City of Calgary representatives, consuls and honorary consuls, former members of the China Regional Advisory Council, our senior leadership team, students, faculty, and staff, along with our community and international for their attendance and support. It means a lot to be part of Asian Heritage Month because it's an important celebration and recognition of Canada's diversity and the value that Asian Canadians bring to the local, national, and global community. The University of Calgary has long shared this vision and championed internationalization, starting with the launch of our international strategy in 2013 and our recent global engagement plan in 2020. We are committed to create a diverse campus community and safe, inclusive, and respectful culture of excellence and engagement, where all members feel valued for the contributions they are making. Our goals have always been included strong connections and partnerships in Asia, and we are committed to building further mutually beneficial partnerships that, as I said, mutually benefit both of our communities. Currently, the University of Calgary has 244 university partners in 53 countries, and specifically, 99 of those partners are from 14 countries in Asia. These partnerships and agreements support world-class research, provide unique learning experiences for our students, led by our faculties and our units. We have also have a diverse campus community with students, staff, and faculty members who come from these regions. In fact, 66.2% of our international students on average come from 46 Asian countries. Through various language, cultural, and historical courses, Asian studies and culture, we are increasing awareness and preparing our students to be citizens of the world. To support our students and encourage international learning experiences in the region, the university has allocated funds and worked with members of the Asian community to provide various scholarships, like the Energizing Canada International Entrance Scholarship, courtesy of Mr. and Mrs. Joseph and Cindy Leon, that provides $20,000 annually to students who graduated from a recognized high school in China, including Hong Kong and Macau, and an additional $20,000 annually to send University of Calgary students to China, including Hong Kong and Macau, for their international learning experiences. But unfortunately, during the pandemic time, we could not do that. Through important partnerships with community organizations, consulates, and diplomatic representatives, we have numerous international events and cultural celebrations over the years, and have been able to share experiences and understand each other's cultures and values. These are all key goals in the university's current global engagement plan, intercultural capacity framework, and commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. It is now my pleasure to introduce University of Canada in residence, Dr. Reg Croshu, who will start our event with a good way by offering an opening prayer and sharing a creation story which ties into the connection to the land. Dr. Croshu is a member of the University of Calgary Senate and a prominent cultural and spiritual leader from Piikani First Nations in southern Alberta, where he formerly served as chief. Dr. Croshu has long-standing relationships with the University of Calgary and has generously shared and offered his assistance, ceremonial leadership, and traditional knowledge to students and other faculties for many years. Dr. Croshu, widely recognized for his dedication to Piikani artifacts, traditions, language, culture, and history, and like his father, the late Joseph Croshu, who awarded an honorary doctorate degree by the University of Calgary in 2001. In fact, Dr. Croshu was a key champion on the strategy that we developed in the university a few years ago. We are honored to have you here today, and we respectfully ask you to offer an opening prayer to guide our thoughts for this evening activities.
Okay, good afternoon. I just want to thank you for the opportunity to join you today to celebrate the Asian Heritage Month. It's important to understand and recognize our heritage, especially with Indigenous people. We also have a Indigenous heritage, and that happens in June, third week in June. I'm going to start with first of all, to acknowledge the territories that we're in. I'm from the Piikani First Nation, and I speak, my language is Blackfoot. But within the Blackfoot language group, there is Siksika, Gana, and Piikani that live in this Treaty 7 area. But other First Nations that came a part of the Treaty 7 area and signed the treaty also were the Tsuut'ina and the Stoney Nakoda nations. They also are a part of the treaty. Also, the Métis that came to live in the area are also part of the treaty area that we live in today that we call Treaty 7. So I want to acknowledge all those First Nations that are a part of our the Treaty 7 area. I just want to say that we're a verbal society, and we, as a verbal society, we follow an oral oral system. So in our oral system, we call to order our gatherings, but in our stories, our creator gave us what we call the sweetgrass. The sweetgrass is what we use, and it represents the concept of sanctified kindness for all. And when I say all, it means all humans, all animals, the land, the whole ecosystem and environment that we live in. We consider all that as our relatives. So we say Nichitapimin, but we also say in our smudge, we also talk about long life in our sanctified kind. So I'll acknowledge the beginning. I would want to, by acknowledging Creator, to start our gathering off today. I'll burn my sweet grass and acknowledge Creator. O kahe. Ayos chipatapio. Ayo napi datos. O kidans kachimadan Christiakoy. Ayos pomokin nanap sa tokem station Christiakoy. Ayos pomo sa chipatapio panik na it's chimakakyan akshikain ni sa ni kudaya kutapa paper spiao. Es pomo sa chipatapio kagok sa katumoya. Anik kamutanik, anik aksipatapio. Ai si peta pio pan Christikui. O kika koksis katupia kamutan is the watchman. Anyay. I just want to say a bit about we live in this area of the southern Alberta and the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains, the Blackfoot Nation today, and we speak the Blackfoot language. One of our, as an indigenous person, we believe that we are responsible to our natural laws and creation. And when I talk about natural laws, in our stories of creation, everything that's created is recognized as natural laws. And, and that creation of everything, plants, animals, all humans, all those are natural laws. But in those natural laws, our belief system says that nobody is more powerful than anybody else. We're all equal. The plants were equal to them, the animals, all humans, even things like COVID were equal. We're all created equal. However, when those are what we recognize as natural laws. But when the natural laws themselves start interacting, each interaction creates absolute laws, facts, theories, and stories that give us our way of life. And when those interactions happen in our creation story, those interaction gave us our absolute laws, which say that when Creator gave us our way of gathering, our way of survival, we had to look at uh, a community survival. And the sweetgrass was given to us as sanctified kindness. So every time we burn the sweetgrass to open our gatherings, we're looking at that collective survival with all creations. And in our prayers, when we say all our relatives, we mean all our relatives, the animal, plants, and all humans. Part of our understanding when we practice our oral management system, we navigate an oral management system for rights and privileges. And as we navigate it, one of the beliefs and values that we have in our system is that understanding of diversity, inclusion of all creation, even all humans are all part of that system. Nobody is left out because we need to survive together as relatives. So that's where the elders at the end, they always say, acknowledge all our relatives, and they acknowledge all our relatives with long life. So I just wanted to share that message with you, especially when you're going into your uh, Asian Heritage Month, and include you in our understanding of collective survival, our understanding, recognize you all Asians as relatives to our smudge and sanctified kindness. So with that, I just like to say that I'm honored and I'm pleased that I was able to open your gathering with an acknowledgement in our language, in our territory, and acknowledge all of us as relatives with long life. Thank you. And
Thank you to Dr. Proshu for the wisdom, the experience, and the knowledge you have imparted. And we have prepared a traditional gift of gratitude that is on its way to you. It is now my
the
pleasure. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Melinda Smith, Vice Provost, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, to give opening remarks and start the formal program. Dr. Smith is the inaugural Vice Provost, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and a professor of political science at the University of Calgary. She now serves on the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council's Governing Council, Statistics Canada Committee on Immigration and Ethnocultural Statistics, the Working Group of Black Communities in Canada, and the Interinstitutional Advisory Committee for the National Dialogues and Action for Inclusive Higher Education and Communities. She's the former Vice President Equity Issues for the Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences, and currently serves as a chair of its advisory committee on equity, diversity, inclusion, and decolonization. Please join me in welcome Dr. Smith to share a few words.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Janica, for that warm introduction. It's my privilege to be here this afternoon as moderator for this 9th year of Asian Heritage Month, which was officially declared by the Government of Canada in May 2002. This year, there are two, there's a local and there's a federal theme for the month. And I think both are important. The local theme for 2021 is from the Asian Heritage Foundation, is Asian Canadians as builders and contributors to Canada. And I think here we are interested in the countless stories, including some as yet untold, about the contributions of diverse Asian Canadians to Canada. The Government of Canada's theme, to Alberta and to Canada, the Government of Alberta's theme for 2021 is recognition, resilience, and resolve. And it highlights the stories and myriad experiences of members of, again, of diverse Asian communities. But I think instead of resilience, I'd like to think of also perseverance, because we could think of the experiences, historic and contemporary, of discrimination, the Chinese head tax, the Komagata Maru incident 107 years ago, which was acknowledged a few days ago, the internment of Japanese Canadians, which the Canadian government is now looking at in terms of an apology, the contemporary experiences, but also historical experiences of anti-Asian racism, which has intensified in the midst of COVID-19, but also highlights the stereotypes to the extent that diverse Asians, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Laotian, Filipino, are experiencing this anti-Asian racism, which means it shows a remarkable inability to differentiate, but it also shows a remarkable ability to stereotype. And that stereotype leads to harm. But it's also, I think, we don't want the stories to be only about these stories. I think it's also an experience of perseverance. And that is some historic contributions of Asian Canadians to Alberta. Not just, we could think of our lieutenant governors, we could think of contributions by our mayors, contributions to business, to sports, to culture, there isn't any walk of life in which Asians haven't had an extraordinary contributions to our province, to our city, our province and the country. This event highlights some of those stories and also the roles students, alumni have played in these stories of Canada. So before I introduce the panelists, I want to just say a little bit about some of these extraordinary stories I think deserve to be highlighted in terms of the contributions of Asian Canadians to Canada. I mean, Asian Canadians have been trailblazers. I've highlighted the lieutenant governors, the mayors, elected officials. I could highlight Asian Canadians in terms of the diversity of the population. For example, Statistics Canada recently released a report which shows that Asian Canadians are 17.7% of Canada's population. Almost half of immigrants population in Canada were born in diverse Asian countries. We think of China, India, the Philippines. Also, Stats Canada highlights that some of the trailblazers in STEM disciplines in particular, but also in other areas include Asian Canadians who are contributing to, for example, to computer and information systems professionals in double the numbers compared to other populations. And this is particularly the case in terms of South Asian and Chinese women also contributing to those areas, again, bursting gender stereotypes about talent and contributions. So we can go on about the role of Chinese, people from India, as I said, Japan, Korea, but there are also long-standing diasporas in Canada. For example, the Sikh community in Canada has been in Alberta, for example, over 100 years. And there is a Sikh studies program at the University of Calgary, which highlights these contributions. There are still stories yet untold. There are West Asians who have been in rural parts of Alberta. For example, some of the oldest mosques in Canada, the first and some of the oldest, were built here in the province of Alberta. So these are only some of the stories about the contributions to culture, to music, to life. In other words, to making our city and our province a better place. But lest we forget, despite that talent and those contributions and that the extent to which Asian Canadians are part of the fabric of our society, we cannot ignore the unrelenting rise of anti-Asian racisms and the deleterious impact they're having on children, on school kids, on universities, and on the well-being of the communities. This is our collective struggle as University of Calgary academics and administrators and students, and as part of our province. So there are diverse stories of Asian Canadians. They tell us about contributions, they tell us about challenges, and that is part of the role of this panel. So without belaboring the point, I think we have four fantastic speakers, and we are in for a really wonderful afternoon and having some serious conversations about these contributions. So what I'd like to do is introduce our panelists. Each will have about 3 minutes to offer some preliminary remarks. Then we'll have a Q&A, and then we'll open up the floor to the virtual floor to the audience. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Teresa Wu Pa, who I've known for some time, you won't need to date it, who is the chair of the Canadian Race Relations Foundations and also the Asian Heritage Foundation and ACT Foundation. What that tells you is Teresa Wu Pa is inextricably connected to city building, to community building, to nation building. She a graduate from the University of Calgary with a degree in social work in 1981. She is the first Canadian woman of Asian descent elected to the Calgary Board of Education, the Alberta Legislature, and a cabinet minister in Alberta. She founded and built 8 nonprofit entities over a span of 40 plus years, including the ACT Foundation and Asian Canadians Together, ACT2 End Racism National Network, Asian Heritage Foundation, the Ethnocultural Council of Calgary, Action Dignity as it's popularly known, and the Calgary Chinese Community Service Organization. Our second speaker this afternoon is Dr. Turan Tanvir Chowdhury, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Family Medicine and the Department of Community Health here at University of Calgary. Dr. Chowdhury his primary research areas are equitable access to care and unmet needs faced by immigrants, refugees, and racialized and ethnic communities. Couldn't be more timely and important and central to our current conversations. He leads his program of research through the approach of community-based participatory research and integrated knowledge translation, where efforts for meaningful community engagement is at the core. Our third speaker will be Dr. Cesar Suva, who is the Director, Research and Program Development, the Immigrant Education Society. Dr. Suva is also a graduate of the University of Calgary, Department of History in 2009, and subsequently obtained a PhD in Culture, History, and Language from the Australian National University in Canberra, working on imperialism in Southeast Asia and the colonial incorporation of religious and ethnic minorities. He is currently the Director of Research and Program Development at the Immigrant Education Society, TIES, and works extensively with UCalgary researchers on various settlement and integration topics such as urban gardening and integration, newcomer, emotional wellness, and mental health, the practice of language brokering, and technology and integration. Suva is also connected to UCalgary's Newcomer Research Network. Our fourth, but not least speaker is an undergraduate student here at University of Calgary. So we'll be delighted to listen to and learn from Salim, who is Fatima Salim, who is currently completing her bachelor's degree in biomedical science at the University of Calgary. She is passionate about serving underrepresented and vulnerable communities. She co-founded a nonprofit, and this is you'll see this as a central theme throughout our speakers in terms of institution building for the public good. A nonprofit that directs surplus food for restaurants to people in need across Canada, and she advocates for the mental health needs of minority youth by volunteering with Kids Help Phone, Bright International, and Art of Recovery. So an extraordinary group of speakers, and I will now turn the floor over to Teresa Wu Pa, who will offer 3 minutes of preliminary remarks, followed by Dr. Tanvir and Dr. Suva, and then Fatima Salim. So without further ado.
Well, thank you, Dr. Smith, and good evening, everyone. I'm Teresa Wu Pa, 八五英语，大家好. So I felt like following Jenica's footstep today and say something in my first language. It is always my great pleasure and my appreciation to be connected to my alma mater, the University of Calgary, and especially during Asian Heritage Month. Thank you so very much for this opportunity to join a panel of very diverse Asian Canadians. So a little bit about myself, a little bit more, and part of my journey as an Asian Canadian. So I'm a first generation Canadian of Chinese descent, but fourth generation in my family to actually live, participate, and contribute to Canada and North America. So my life journey is very much shaped by the policy of the head tax and the Chinese Exclusion Act that have impacted many Chinese Canadians. So these policies caused generations of separations and hardships for my family. It required practically every member of the family to be resilient. And this particular status phenomenon also instilled a sense of confidence and resolve in me as sort of fourth generation of my family to believe that we should be treated as equal members of society and all at the various tables and spaces. So being born, raised in Hong Kong until adolescent meant I was totally immersed in an Asian cultural environment during my formative years, where my cultural heritage was validated and is a source of beauty, strength, and richness. My total lack of English fluency upon arrival enhanced my sensitivity to the needs and issues of those who experience cultural and linguistic barriers, which would turn out to have profound influence on my professional life. I pursued a degree in social work from the University of Calgary and was engaged in community building, community development for over 4 decades. I started and built 8 community entities, as Dr. Smith mentioned, and contributed between 6 to 25 years to each of those organizations over 42 years. So I just like to perhaps touch on, why I started Asian Heritage Foundation in Calgary in 2000. And had the opportunity to invite Senator Vivian Poy, who ultimately actually brought forward her private member motion in the Senate and had Canada declare May as Asian Heritage Month. I saw Asian Heritage Month as an opportunity and a platform to foster greater awareness about the participation and contribution of Asian Canadians, but never to forget the core reason behind the genesis of Asian Heritage Month that started in the United States in the late 70s was to talk about issues and policies that continue to concern and impact Asian Canadians and Asian Americans. So I think that is very important to remember that original objective. So I think in terms of my recent work, to enhance civic participation and leadership development for systemic change to the persistent underrepresentation of racialized minorities, I formed the ACT Foundation, and to respond to the escalating anti-Asian racism, I helped to form a national network to respond to issues of hate and racism. So when I became involved in countering the devastating cut to language support to newcomer students in the 1990s, when we were the 3rd most racialized city in the country, the top 5 receiver of new Canadians, I ended up running for school board trustee to become the first Canadian female to be elected to this board. And then I became an MLA and a member of the cabinet responsible for Asian Pacific relations, as well as the chair of the Asia Advisory Council. So my Asian Canadian upbringing positioned me well to help to bridge our government, our province, and the various Asian regions that offer immense opportunities for Alberta as an exporting province. So I was also asked to touch on the roadblocks I experienced. So I encountered institutionalized racism when I was trying to advocate for my community, inequitable access to resources because of the status of our racialized background, in addressing the needs of the ESL students. You look at international trained professions, they continue to encounter a lot of systemic barriers. When actually we touch on some of the stereotypes that impact more specifically against Canadians of Asian descent. After I won my first election in 1995 to the school board, someone took time to write a letter to me and call me the Yellow Peril. So this is in our lifetime. So this is not something that happened in the 1800s. It happened in my lifetime. It happened during SARS And it came, the yellow peril actually stereotype, the term came back in just last year. So, as a Canadian politician of Asian descent, we were painted with the same stroke as susceptible to foreign influence, have to be put under greater scrutiny, and must behave differently. I was told in public when I was in MLA that I have to actually be extra careful because of my ethnicity, my race, and where I was born. Our loyalties and citizenship can be easily challenged, and rejections always hurts and scars. So those are some of the roadblocks that I would like to share with you today. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for letting us be here, Dr. Ruanpura and Dr. Smith, and all the team of the UCalgary International. So I'm an academic, and I do research on immigrant and refugee health and wellness. So if I think about my Canadian age, I'm 10 years old. Means I migrated to Canada just 10 years back. So I define myself to be a new immigrant myself. So I'm basically from Bangladesh, and I was trained as a physician there. And then I went out for doing the PhD and the master's and all the training. And I was trained to be a number cruncher, like big data, millions of people's of data, crunching them, making a sense out of them. But when in 2000, so I started my postdoc here in Calgary in 2010. So Calgary is my first and only place I knew in Canada. But in 2015, when I got an opportunity to create a program of research, one thing that attracted and pulled me towards is the grassroots community level work with the newcomer communities or the ethnic and racialized communities in Calgary. So one reason for that was within my surroundings, I didn't find that many people focusing on that research, like making that a home. So that was one of the pulling factor for me. Another factor was what to do about research. So when I was thinking and talking to people and meeting mentors, when I was having a discussion with them, one thing was quite clear, like from the places we come, Canada is quite decent in spoon feeding relative to the places we come. Still, there is lots of room for improvement. But I thought, can I position myself to work within the communities, the grassroots communities, where I can mobilize, help, or facilitate the communities to hold on to the spoon and start feeding themselves? Probably there is more bang for buck, more empowerment, more community development, more community mobilization toward positive things. So that defined my research. And one more thing was, as I was rebuilding myself, I took this opportunity, as I didn't have a program of research that was already being built. I had to do it from the scratch. I took this opportunity to let the community help me decide what research I can do. So community was a big guiding factor for me towards building the program of research that I will be taking forward. So being an Asian, being a South Asian within the grassroots communities, it helped me to, being an insider, it helped me towards this initial connection, initial building, being within the community, looking around the community. I knew the problem firsthand. It was not somebody in the ivory tower, in the classroom, or in a cubicle, just looking down and trying to find something. So that helped me a lot. But on the other hand, the issues that Teresa talked about, those were very evident. So it's more of a health, wellness, and the social determinants. Everything started coming together. If you call about racism, discrimination, we started to look at those as a social determinant of health angle. And if you talk about solving those, one thing that we know that we always push about resilience, about those who are the how to call it, I will not use the word victim per se, those who are the recipient side. What about the resilience of the providing side, like those who are making these things happen? So all those fascinates me. And then I know, due to my sort of a type of work we have been trying to do, like solutions are grassroots communities, they develop their own solutions, if not strongly facilitated by the the system. So the solutions, the innovations that happens in the grassroots, that started to fascinate me. So I'm in a position where I'm an insider. I'm in a position where I have these research skills. I'm in a position where I can help the communities to answer some questions that I can help them answer through my methodological expertise. And I think that's where I am in. I think connecting the university with the community, connecting the community with the university, and being part of both, and trying to facilitate the community's voice, community's empowerment towards the solutions that I think they think suitable, and bringing in the university and the policymakers or the other members of the ecosystem, so that they also take the community's voices strongly towards the solution that we all need to contribute to. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Cesar Suva, and I'd like to thank Melinda and University of Calgary International for the honor of including me on this panel. I'm really sort of honored to be included in this group with Fatima, Turin, and Teresa. So just a little bit about me now, and by way of introduction, I'm a Filipino-Canadian. I was brought here by my parents when I was 2 years old, brought here to Alberta. I grew up in Edmonton, actually, and my parents were always very keen about maintaining their connection to the Philippines. We visited many times during my childhood, but most importantly for me, we spoke Tagalog at home, and my parents were very prescient about the value of languages. They knew that I'd learn English from friends, and they left me to my own devices in terms of figuring out the English language. So they ensured that I spoke Tagalog at home, and they enrolled me in French immersion in school. So I grew up speaking 3 languages. I spoke Tagalog, I spoke with my family, I spoke English with my friends, and my education and academics at the time was in French. Fast forward a little bit, I finished my undergrad here at the University of Calgary in history, and then after that, I went to Australia to do my graduate work at the Australian National University, and I finished with a PhD looking at American imperialism and religious minorities in the Southern Philippines, as Melinda mentioned earlier. Since 2016, actually, I started working with the Immigrant Education Society, and the Immigrant Education Society is a settlement agency here in Calgary, and we work with recent newcomers and lots of programming oriented towards language training, job training, settlement, and things like that. And I thought that was really sort of really interesting work, and really kind of connected to some of the research that I did during my graduate studies in minority integration and the state's relations with minorities. And also, as in terms of my own experience being this minority here in Canada. So since then, I've been working on new programming on settlement and integration, and most recently, I have a particular interest in urban gardening, in settlement programming, and some family-based interpreting or language brokering, urban to rural migration, and information communications technology in programming. So, like, to me, integration and becoming and settling into a new society isn't just about learning language and getting a job. I think from my work, from my research work, and from my work with ties, it really is about community building and gaining a sense of belonging. And what are the ways? What are the different ways we can kind of build programming or build sort of processes and approaches in terms of community building and gaining a sense of belonging. So as you can surmise, then like being Asian and being an immigrant is really central to my work and to my identity. Growing up, I faced Asian racism constantly, like in the playground, being stereotyped. I even felt bad as an Asian because, the stereotypes of being Asian didn't actually apply to me and I couldn't understand it. Like I was bad at math. I didn't have a martial art. There was, lots of, identity crises that I sort of went through growing up as a Filipino here in Alberta. I worked overseas for a few years, and I worked in the Philippines for a few years. I came back here in Alberta, and then that work really wasn't recognized. It almost was like I spent 5 years, not really doing anything. Growing up Asian, Filipino in Alberta, and speaking French at school, English with friends, Tagalog at home, I went through a little bit of this sort of crisis of identity. I didn't really know what being Filipino was about, was all about as a kid, and I didn't really know what being Canadian was. So there was this sort of like these sort of different kind of identity tensions and stuff like that. As I grew older and as I sort of grew as a professional, grew wiser as an individual, I've really sort of embraced this sort of multitudinous identity. And I've really come to realize that, the identities of people like me is really like a compilation of different things, different experiences and different, who you are, right? Asian Canadians we're all at the same time, Asian, Edmontonian, Calgarian, Canadian. It really is, centered on our membership in society is really centered on the sense of community building and sense of belonging to each other. And I think that's really the important thing that I learned as an individual and as a professional. So, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Firstly, thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm honored to be here among some really incredible people and listen to their stories tonight. I personally was born in Pakistan and my family immigrated to Canada when I was 8 years old. While I faced my own hardships at school, from learning a new language to trying to live up to the expectations of my parents, my peers, teachers with the Asian identity, I also watched as my parents struggled to provide for us. As many immigrants do, they worked several jobs, they studied simultaneously, and we faced poverty. We faced difficulty accessing housing and meals and navigating the healthcare system due to racial and language barriers. All of this to say that these hardships, alongside Pakistani cultural and religious values, such as being community-oriented and love and respect, all of those inspired me to advocate for vulnerable populations. And right now in my life, I wear many, many different hats at the University of Calgary. I'm a biomedical sciences student and researcher, and I'm also the student union representative for the Cummings School of Medicine, passionate about mental health, largely from my own experiences as an immigrant when I came here, and one of my loved ones actually struggled to get access to mental health care. I'm also soon to be the author of a children's book with Austin Macaulay Publishers that aims to really spur conversations about mental health in the South Asian community. And I love dedicating my time to advocating for youth mental well-being through organizations that were mentioned earlier, like the Kids Health Phone. I've even worked with the Pakistan Canada Association. And then separately, I've co-founded a national nonprofit that redirects meals to those in need. And tonight, I'm really looking forward to bringing the youth perspective to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you, for the extraordinary stories you've shared, but also the exemplary contributions to community building, to city building, and to nation building. I mean, I think all of the areas you're contributing to highlight, I think, key themes that are important now and have always been. So I want to actually come to a theme that's shared across each of the stories you have told, whether it's from Bangladesh or Pakistan or Philippines or Hong Kong and China. But it's about the multiplicity. And when people say Asian, it's like it's a singular idea rather than this complexity, the nuances, the linguistic diversity, the religious, cultural, and Dr. Silva, and the disciplinary, right? You're supposed to be good at math and computer science, okay? No history of music and all this other, well, music may be okay. So that also speaks to the kind of the stereotypes, which is seen as positive stereotypes, but also can have negative impact because not all Asians are wealthy. So they point out, not all are high flyers. So I wonder if you could each talk to the downside of this myth of the model minority, and how it shapes and limits and circumscribes what each of you are able to do, or how you navigate that complexity. We could start in the order people spoke, or the reverse, however people want to respond.
I think that it's important to. I think diversity is about being aware, understand, and accept our differences. And so I think that bringing that into the when we look at Asian Canadians, we need to have an understanding on the diversity and the complexity and the richness of that community. We must not look at actually the community as a monolith. And because that would be a disservice actually to the community. Because I think it's okay when we, once a year we come together during the month of May to celebrate together. We have to have a shared platform to look at our history and our current status. But the experience of the Filipino is very different from the experience of the Japanese and Chinese Canadian, and very different from the South Asian and those of Muslim background. So if we have, observed a lot of social inequities that surfaced during the pandemic, and if we don't recognize and recognize the differences, and look at how to address those issues and find solutions differently, then we are not going ever to solve these issues and problems, appropriately. So I think I'm going to stop here and let others also share their perspective.
So when I look at this issue, and I struggled as a researcher when I saw that all the South Asians are lumped together, all the East Asians are lumped together. Generally, we don't put all the Asians when we crunch the data. We talk about people, and we don't get the nuances of the similarities and dissimilarities under it. So the way I normally explain to the students and other people, hey, if you look from the 10th floor, all of them look same. If you come to the 5th floor, you will see the bigger groups, South Asians and everything, East Asians or Central Asians. But and if you have come up with a program of an idea from that level, it's not going to work for long term. So we need to go to the ground floor to understand the problem. Yes, come back again to the 5th floor, because a government or a system cannot afford to create those ground floor level programs. So that something is a little bit of overarching of communal, based on the commonality. But if you want to do the community development, then you need to go to the ground floor and work on it. So that's one angle I try to explain. Another angle was that is very interesting. Like, if you think about what happened recently about what has been happening for the last couple of years, anti-East Asian, the racism due to COVID scenario that's been happening, or the other previously what we have seen happening. So all these, even during the post 9/11, the anti-Muslim, or even taking the Sikh people to be Muslim and hitting up on them, who has this long turban and long beard. So these all have this root level problem of anti-race, racial thinking within the communities and belonging to the communities. So we need to think about a little bit of in roots what's happening, because to me, it's more of a at risk situation. I will give you an example. The same people who made this, the same group of same notion of thinking, what gave rise to this COVID-related anti-Asian sentiment, gave rise to the 9/11 related anti-Muslims or anti-South Asian sentiment, or that was also seen during this previous years in history. So it's more of I look at racism to be a root cause, but not a single cause. There is a continuum in it. So, like people get, if you're on the left side, you look at the so-called less dormant section of stereotyping people. And then there is, if you go a little bit right, the covert racism that happens on the people. And then on the racial act that comes out, the extreme component of the same continuum. So it's more of a looking at it to be, okay, so probably everybody in this left side or the middle are at risk to do a racial act that will be, picked up by us as a very denouncing event. But people are moving in the continuum depending on the exposure and the situations they have. So again, that also need to be, to me, included when we have this conversation about different subsections of the racial and racialist communities with the mainstream communities and having that conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, to me, an inclusive society is a society where everybody can participate on their own terms, and they have the opportunity to kind of play to their strengths and contribute in terms of what they want to contribute and what they can contribute, and gain gain from society in the way that they want to gain and appreciate it. To sort of create a myth of the model, the model minority. I mean, even though it is positive supposedly, but then it's still locked into certain sort of categories. Like, who decided on the model, right? Who says that, hey, you Asians, you guys are great because you tick all these boxes. I am sort of deciding this for you, right? And then at what point can we start making this model? Like, does that mean, like me, because I'm second generation Asian, I can start deciding who, the model immigrants are in the future or something? Can I make a little chart and score everybody? So like the model is, what is that? And I think, people, integrate and become part of society on their own terms. Like maybe there are people who don't speak English so well, but then they own a business and they hire and they employ people, and they have they sort of help other people sort of integrate economically in society. So as a kid, like I mentioned before, I felt like I was a bad Asian because I didn't fit some of these sort of categories. Like I was supposed to be good at math, but I actually like music. I was supposed to be good at certain things, but interested in engineering, and I'm supposed to turn in be interested in medicine and stuff like that, but I was actually interested in history and stuff like that. So I didn't quite fit in. And even a Filipino at the time, when I was growing up, like, Asians were Koreans and Chinese, and the Japanese and Filipinos were somewhere in between, them and Latin Americans and Mexicans. So I spent my time sort of like building my identity between friends who were, like North Asian and Latin American. So I mean, like I kind of was confused also, like growing up as as an immigrant and as someone who was trying to sort of look for my roots. But like it took some time for me to realize that all that stuff doesn't really matter and stuff. So you build your identity on your own terms, on your own strengths. And I think as a society, locking people into identities change too, right? So you become somebody else. When you immigrate, you were one person and you become somebody else. And oftentimes many immigrants are forced to sort of reinvent themselves, not just in terms of their language and identity, but even in terms of their professions, because they can't practice the profession that they had, back in their old country here. So they have to learn something else. So there's a constant sort of reinvention. And I think, allowing all members of society to reinvent themselves and to become, who they want to become is really foundational in a free society and in an inclusive society. Thanks.
From my perspective, what I see is that the model minority stereotype that we're talking about, it's a very damaging assumption about Asian Canadians. At the surface level, calling a group high achieving may sound like a compliment, it may sound like a praise, but it really dehumanizes people. And as mentioned by Melinda Smith and everyone else here, that we're put into these categories that we have to mold ourselves into, and that really obscures the anti-Asian racism, and it leaves Asians out of the effort against discrimination. So I'm going to use a personal example of what happened to me when we treat all Asians as the same. So I have at times internalized this stereotype, and it wasn't until a couple years back that I realized that it was such a strong yet harmful part of my identity. Like almost every other student, I struggled with my first year in university. I got a D on a physics midterm and devastation set in. Asians are supposed to be good at math, they're supposed to be good at science, they're supposed to be good at physics. So what was happening to me? So much of my self-worth and identity was tied to these academic accomplishments and what everyone else had expected of me, that I was embarrassed to seek out help. I was afraid to ask for help because of that model minority label that suggested that I didn't need help, that I was supposed to be performing well. And these expectations can have really negative consequences. In trying to model ourselves according to this myth, we lose ourselves and we never really seek out who we are. What was I passionate about? What did I want to do? So it's this continuous hustle without any breaks. And I know that for several of my friends and loved ones, struggling to meet this expectation actually created mental health issues that they were then scared to seek out help for, once again, because of this minority label. So South Asians in general are less likely to seek help for emotional and health problems. And that is in part due to this model minority label. If you don't fit into that myth or take on a non-traditional career path that's outside of medicine and engineering, you're constantly othered and you're looked down upon, sometimes by others, but also sometimes by your own community because it's been so internalized. Thank you.
If I may, Dr. Smith, to add
Yes.
points. Speaking specifically about the stereotype of model minority, it has served to divide the racialized communities instead of actually bringing the community that are impacted by racism to work together towards common solutions. It also served to silence the Asian Canadian community because we're not supposed to complain. Because you have it better than other people, other racialized communities. So it's great for the kids who actually get the awards at the end of the year. But we also have lots of students of Asian descent who need help and have fallen through the cracks. And the community is feeling silenced, that we're not supposed to raise issues. We're not supposed to complain. So, and then therefore, a lot of the needs and issues are not being addressed and overlooked and omitted. As is so evident right now that every single anti-racism policy in this country have omitted Asian Canadians. So I think that it is time for us to actually recognize these harmful and myths of stereotypes and how it's negatively impacting the communities. Thank you.
So I want to return to, again, another common thread that's interwoven in this conversation, these stories. Because on the one hand, yes, there's this diversity and complexity and the nuances you are all speaking to, the multiplicities. And yet there are these shared threads. And one of those shared threads is a history of stereotypes. You could say it's positive, but it has its downside and its harm, and also racisms. And that, but we could be deluded into thinking the racism is the emergence or the 9/11 of COVID-19, but it's actually been a threat for a very long time. And so, because when I started out, I could talk about the head tax or the exclusion, or the Sikhs and Muslims and Hindus being turned away at the incident in in Vancouver 107 years ago. The internment, that's a long durée of experiences of racisms. So what accounts for this persistence despite the quote unquote positive stereotypes, what accounts for this persistence of racisms? And what are the impacts of that racism? You've suggested some of them, but I still would say that in some disciplines, in some areas in walks of life, Asian Canadians are underrepresented. But we can't foreground that because apparently Asian Canadians are so successful. So I wonder if you could speak to that. And also the homogenization obscures the gaps for some Asian Canadians by class or gender or sexuality or any forms of diversity within these diverse communities. So I wonder if you can speak to this continuity of racism despite all the model minority stories.
I'll start because I have been so immersed in this work since last April, unexpectedly. So what I have learned the last little while, because I'm also working with a community, specifically the Asian Canadian community, that is not well versed on issues of discrimination and racism, that actually have just coming out of this phase of disbelief and denial and questioning, and now maybe a little bit more comfortable to actually talk about it and challenge it and speak up. And one of my learning recently is the need to make these stereotypes and biases and prejudice visible. We have to help all Canadians learn how it's being perpetuated in our daily lives, in our schools, in our workplaces, in government, and in the grocery store. So if I may use maybe 3 examples. One is leadership. So why do we have report after 2 decades that tells us that women and racialized minorities and Indigenous Canadians continue to be underrepresented at important committees and decision-making tables? So we hear this, same report, same numbers for decades, and why aren't we changing it? So because people in the system they are not making it the priority to change. But why is it so difficult to change? Part of it is we are not actually, it takes work and effort to make this visible for all of us. So if people think that you have to communicate in a very direct way, in a very forceful way, in a very assertive way, in order to be considered as leadership quality, then a lot of people who were not raised that way, raised with different cultural practices and norms and beliefs, then the system is working against people who are different. So so that's the I think that's the assumption of what constitute attributes to leadership roles. If people consider to be threats, if Yellow Peril is about threat, seeing the advancement of Asian Canadians as threats. So if people see that is not a benefit but a threat, then people would hesitate. Well, we already have 1 engineer on our team. Do we need 1 more? Questions that were never asked about Euro Canadians, right? So I think the organizations and entity being able to actually at that moment name that issue and deal with it and learn from it and actually identify how they're going to stop that kind of practice and thinking. The other is the perpetual foreigner. When people talk about blaming Asians for the unaffordable housing prices and rental prices, and without actually using facts, without separating, who are those Asian buyers and who are Asian Canadians, without making those differentiation, when people talk about foreign influence, not thinking that the born, raised, aerospace engineers of Asian descent, their career are put on risk. Their physical movement is restricted in their own workplace. We have to make these things visible for everyone. That racism is real. It happens in our workplace. It happens in school when our children do not learn the real history of Canada. They do not see that their ancestors actually lived, existed, participated, and contributed to this country as builders and contributors. Then this myth is going to perpetuate. our children would not be empowered, and they would not feel that they are equals at the table. So I think that it's time that we actually make all this visible and then raise that awareness and consciousness every day.
Thanks, Teresa. Does anyone else want to respond to this question of the durability of racisms across time?
To me, the durability means it has been across time, right? We all know that. I think I agree with Teresa. Like, it's about, we have been talking in a reactive way when something happens, but now it's a good time. Like, for example, within our University of Calgary, I'm proud that there have been action being taken. Within the Cummings School of Medicine, we have a group of people who are working against this one. But I would like to see that push a little bit more. What we are doing, we are making a list. Oh, these are the resources for you. You can go and get those things. So in a sense, we are preaching to the choir. We need to take and preach to the overall communities and overall the members of the team. For example, within the University of Calgary, as a researcher, I have to go through, yearly a 1 hour refreshing of mind of the financial dealings of the grants. And in the ethics committee, we have to make sure that our certificates of understanding ethics is up to date. But we don't have anything like that. That is mandatory for all the members of the University of Calgary. Like, hey, in a yearly basis, you have to take a workshop as a part of your commitment or employment in University of Calgary about EDI. Those are still, if I want to take, I can take. The options are in front of you, but can it not be part of the system? Then everybody, because those workshops are more of a, just simple workshop, but very powerful in terms of putting us in front of a mirror. So as I said, you remember the continuum of, in the racism thinking. I think if I say to myself, oh, Turin, do you have racial thinking in your mind? I will say, no. I'm a very good person. I don't even think in that way. But when I am put in front of the mirror, I might find some ways where, oh, Turin, probably you need to work on those things. Probably you need to be cautious. Why not? So those type of thing, this making it, not only available as a responsibility of everyone to take part on that type of activities will hopefully take one step towards, eradicating this racial injustice that we have, or this way of thinking, or being a bystander contributing to that one. Because I have seen, within our communities, the ethnic communities in Calgary, if only those who get affected, they take on the street, and the others are remaining, a little bit of as a bystander way of dealing with it. So until and unless we take one step forward and understanding, oh, today it was their turn, but tomorrow it will be my turn, and after tomorrow it will be your turn. If we don't have that feeling, we will always be, divided. And as you say, this model, immigrant component also. Oh no, I cannot go. Probably these are that's happening to them. It will not help to me. I'm a models immigrant. Thank you.
I wonder, this might be a good opportunity to shift to some of the audience's questions, because in fact they do invite us to think about what the university, which is part of the broader community and the city, what's being done in the university and what can be done differently or better. So one of the questions is, what can the university and its members, faculty, staff, and students do more to support Asian communities in the city, but more broadly? And what is the university doing, or what can it be doing, especially to help marginalized Asian communities? And of course, that begs the question: is there a recognition, as the theme calls for, of this diversity and actually the need to support, rather than just celebrate, say, the high achievers or the most successful? what can the university do? And all of you are involved in different university community, nonprofits, and organizations. So it might be helpful to this question to highlight some of those.
May I start? Okay. So, that university or most of the systems have an attitude of working with the creams of the community. For example, we have in the Cummings School of Medicine quite a number of student high school student programs that engages high school across Calgary, but that's competitive. That's very the people on the top of the rank, they get into those programs. But I think as a university, as a commitment to become a fabric of the the ethnic communities in Calgary, can we take ourselves to the people who would never have applied to these programs? Can we come up with programs that will engage with the different levels? It can be schools, it can be community cultural organizations, where we will be working and exposing the community high school students, those who probably never thought about applying to these ones, those who probably never, that didn't even cross their mind, like, oh, should I apply? Oh, no, not now. These are for high achievers. So that might be one powerful thing to start mobilizing community. That's one of it, what university can do, because it falls in the way that we have been trying to do some programs. But again, there is this taboo, like, am I penalizing a high achiever because he or she is a high achiever? But on the other hand, being more responsive to the people of the community whom we generally miss out. This is one thing that we have been contemplating on. Another component is like, connectivity across the communities, so that we end up being, I'm talking about the new immigrants, due to our life, due to our struggle of resettlement, integration, and career achievement, we tend to get a siloed scenarios. So if the university can be a role where they can bring this newcomer communities, the First Nation communities, and other communities who are a little bit of in the sidelines together, so that their voice can be collectively put up in front. So that's the like two things I dream about to make happen.
Thanks. Are there other comments in this, or can I go to another question?
I think I can comment on that one. I think contrary to what universities have increasingly been understood to be in terms of their role in society, I think there's a lot of emphasis in the past couple of generations on universities being, training people for jobs, right? So really, it's just this equation, right? Like young people go into universities, they come out, and then they have jobs. But then, really, the intention, universities weren't really invented just for getting people jobs. It has this sort of institutional social role where universities are inform social discourse. Universities help the society, members of society, gain a better understanding of how human societies and populations sort of function and work, and that doesn't necessarily equate to jobs, right? So I think I don't want to get caught up on the whole sort of economic integration thing, but part of the myth of the model minority is a subcomponent of like the myth of the national narrative. Minorities, not just model minorities, like all minorities kind of have to get fit and cobbled into this sort of like national narrative, right? That's supposed to be, predominant in public discourse. And I think, what universities could do at an intellectual level and at a level of public discourse is try to sort of like decouple society from being so sort of anchored to these sort of national narratives, and they have, I think, over the past few generations. But it's such a pervasive thing for people and for identity building, and when you talk, Melinda, about like the persistence of racism and the persistence of this sort of stereotyping, I think it's because constantly people have to be fit, minorities have to be fit into this pervasive or jammed into this pervasive sort of national narrative, predominant national narrative. If you go to another country, I lived in Australia, Asians fit completely in a different way. Filipinos fit in a completely different way into that national narrative. Suddenly I had to relearn, what I was as a Filipino, just because it was a different sort of, idea of, who the model or what your role is as a model minority. So I think, and like here in Canada, Asians have been here since the 19th century. Why does it feel like we're still a recent minority or a recent set of immigrants? So like in terms of like that intellectual sort of role, that sort of public discourse kind of role that universities can play, really let's decouple society from being so married to these ideas of national narratives and national myths and model minority myths and things like that.
So this is interesting because so we've been talking about the longue durée of some of these experiences, and yet this idea of newness, this idea of just arrived, this idea as always already foreign or suspect, right? So there's an element of that persists over time. And so here we are in 2021. If we were looking, say, in 2031 and we assemble this group again, the question is, how would we, what should we be expecting about this? And Teresa, here, I think you can kind of bridge the gap between this current conversation and say, where should we be? What kind of world should we be making so that we aren't talking about this in 10 years down the road? So I'm interested in this question of how do we affect systemic and sustainable change so that we can move beyond this, just fitting into this narrow box of Asian Canadians, singular, rather than creating new narratives of belonging.
Well, thank you, Dr. Smith, for this question. My answer is going to show my age a little bit, but I'm also answering from the perspective of a grandmother. I do not want to see that when my grandchildren are 10 years older, that we are in the same state. So this is the 50th anniversary of the Canadian Multiculturalism Act. And so a lot of the work that started around cross-cultural understanding and the need to look at institutional change started in the 1980s. And I actually was involved talking to schools about, what does it mean to be more inclusive, more reflective. And I was, participated in the police cross-cultural training. So I think my first response is systemic barriers require systemic change. And so it cannot be one-off, cannot be one training, then we are done. And so I think that I have a couple of examples here. The whole, the University of Calgary, your response to the TRC, the indigenization, I think that, ultimately, I think it makes most of us, all of us, more socially conscious. It makes us a better, more considerate, respectful people. And so I look at your internationalization, and I was reminded in preparation for today, when I was a very few, person of color in the social work program. In 1977, I started. And that was my 6th year in Canada. So 20% of my grade resides on my class participation. So I would go to class, worried, okay, what am I gonna say? What am I gonna say in a way that all the other white people in the room would understand and like? So I had to hide myself. But with your internationalization, with the internationalization of our post-secondary entities, you now have different forms of diversity on campus. You are bringing people that have diverse perspectives, diverse worldview, diverse lived experience, and through exchange and working together would actually come up with new innovative solutions. And I think that that's a very positive change. I think that through recognizing, the changing demographics, the changing context. And if you actually institute systemic change, it's a great form of empowerment to people. Just imagine the teachers going to actually teach children differently, treat the diverse student population differently. The social workers and the psychologists would actually be able to treat people with greater cultural sensitivity. And the engineers, would be more open, become exposed to, a different, way of doing things, and experience different culture and different way of looking at things, and become experts, in different parts of the world. I think those can be great things that derive from, being more inclusive and diverse. But me now, Dr. Smith. So I believe that we need to make some of this mandatory. I believe that cross-cultural sensitivity should not be options, and if we believe it is important, then all teachers, student teachers should learn about the racism of Canada, to learn about how to be anti-racist teachers and how to be anti-racist health practitioners. So I don't believe it should be optional. I think we should set goals. And I think that's the way we're going to see things change in 10 years.
I can, and I'd be happy to provide a perspective.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. I was just going to say that I think it really starts with the students as well. I remember whether I was in high school or university, that students actually have internalized this model minority concept. It's an everyday topic, and students, oh, you're Asian, you're gonna do just fine on that exam, don't even worry about it. And just things like that. So it's also raising awareness among youth that this model minority is really a myth, it's not a compliment. And in fact, Asians are not this undisputed success story all the time. Oftentimes what we're doing is we're ignoring the people who are actually falling through the gap. And I think moving forward, what we really need to put in place is encouragement for Asians of different communities to be open to seeking help and not internalizing this myth themselves. So whether it's access to mental health resources that are specific for them, culturally relevant healthcare, addressing some of the social determinants of health that Turin has talked about earlier, and putting those supports in place for the future, and letting youth know nowadays that this is not acceptable, that this is not the truth, it's just
Thank you.
Okay. So I will just echo what Teresa said, like it has to be part of us. It has to be active part of us, number one. And number two is like, like maybe I'm hoping like the university leadership would push the envelope a little bit and take this active part of us in the community as well. It's not about how the minority communities work together. The part of this narrative and the part of the discussion need to include the dominant community as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So
go ahead.
I was just going to combine like stuff that Fatima said and what Turin just said. I think like an inclusive society is not just accommodating minorities. It's not just it's like it's community building, like I mentioned before, right? So if we look at it from the perspective of community building, I think we all work together. It's not the future shouldn't be where the minorities or the newcomers, have to constantly, have these goalposts that they need to pass, set by, whoever is deciding on that, what the model minority is, right? So there's a model minority, you guys should be doing this and you guys shouldn't be doing that. I think as a society, we need to set that up together, and and stop blaming the minority in that sense, that like for example, like decredentialization of professions. So like many children of immigrants have to go through maybe poverty, maybe or lower middle class incomes when they didn't have to do that because their their parents' educations is actually quite sort of professionalized, but it's just not recognized here because they don't have Canadian experience. So for some reason, Canadian experience, the requirement for Canadian experience is this overriding kind of requirement over other sort of professional requirements. And I think it's a little bit of like an out for maybe some subtle sort of racism or some pathway towards an expression of maybe like of racism. And Fatima, you were talking about mental health. Oftentimes, trying to get more minorities to access mental health, there's a heavy emphasis on stigma amongst minority communities, right? So we just have to remove the stigma, which is true. And I think that's true with all communities, but I think you also have to put an emphasis on culturally competent professionals who can, deal with different cultures and understand how other cultures sort of deal with mental health and use sort of like maybe religious pathways or family pathways or social network kind of pathways and things like that. So really sort of like that, that community-based sort of community building sort of perspective approach, I think, where, society meets in the middle, different elements of society kind of meet in the middle. It's a collective effort. It's not just, the effort of some people and some segments of society. And I think, in the future, my vision is, that society is like that, where we all kind of meet in the middle and we all sort of like, the model minorities, the non-model minorities reach out, and the local society or the people who've been here for a little bit longer also reach out and also make the effort.
Okay, on that note, I think that's that's a good bridge to closing, because it's this kind of university community building in a way that's actually leads to more sustainable, and healthy relations, but also lives, is a good way to pass the baton off to my colleague, Janica, who will offer some. So I want to thank you all for just a wide-ranging and rich conversation about the diversity of the Asian community, but also the diversity of issues and challenges faced by them that are obscured by myths and mythologies. So I'm going to turn over the floor to my colleague, Janica, who has been the leader of our internationalization initiatives at home and abroad.
Thank you very much, Melinda. Many thanks for of course attending and contributing to this timely and important conversation. And then of course, thank you to Dr. Croshu for his opening prayers and remarks. And thank you very much to you, my colleague Melinda, Dr. Melinda Smith, for serving as the moderator for the event. And all our panelists, our very long-standing friend, Teresa Wupau, Dr. Turin Tanvir Chowdhury, Dr. Cesar Soa, and Fatima Salim, and stories, your insights, and that you shared tonight with different perspectives and the experiences that you went through as Asians in Canada, and it was really great to see that the diverse perspective of the comments that you have brought for today's discussion. As I mentioned, our university, the University of Calgary, is committed to an equitable, diverse, and inclusive university in which Asian Canadians as well as members of society can flourish. So we wish you all a very enjoyable and successful Asian Heritage Month. Stay safe, and I hope that I always say that I'm saying that stay safe and well at the tail end of this pandemic, because I hope that in few weeks and few months from now that we can physically meet and enjoy and have great discussions like this one. So thank you everyone. Enjoy and have a wonderful evening.